If you have always believed that everyone should play by the same rules and be judged by the same standards, that would have gotten you labeled a radical 60 years ago, a liberal 30 years ago, and a racist today. These are the words of the African-American economist Thomas Sowell, a staunch critic of the idea framework of affirmative action. One of the most important ways in which affirmative action is pursued in South Africa is through the policy of so-called Black Economic Empowerment, or BEE. In a previous video, I have argued that BEE is destructive. In this second episode of a two-part series, I'll provide 5 reasons why BEE is not only destructive, but also immoral. Number 1. BEE is dishonest. It does not empower black people, but the politically connected. While it is claimed that BEE and the broader notion of affirmative action is aimed at empowering poor black people, in reality, a wealthy white businessman from Sandton who is friends with the president will benefit from BEE much more than the impoverished black community of Alexandria right across the street. Number 2. BEE is dishonest in the same sense that it cannot survive without blame shifting. It teaches black people not to take responsibility for their circumstances and to always blame someone else. It explains both white prosperity and black poverty as a result of the same unquestionable phenomenon: theft by whites. It is predicated on the false assumption that you can only be wealthy if you have oppressed someone, and you can only be poor if you have been oppressed. Number 3. The assumptions underlying BEE is so obsessed with equality that it would rather have a society that is completely destroyed, but in which people are at least equal in their misery, than one in which people flourish, but in which they are also unequal. Or, as Margaret Thatcher used to describe it, they would rather have the poor be poorer, provided that the rich is less rich. Number 4. The promoters of BEE concede that categorizing people according to the color of their skin and treating them differently is not necessarily a morally justifiable principle, but it claims that it is moral when they do it, because it is for a good cause. Well, as we know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. There has never been a regime that claims to have evil intentions. Intentions are not entirely irrelevant, but it comes very close to it. In this sense, Aldous Huxley said that the end cannot justify the means, for the simple and obvious reason that the means employed determine the nature of the ends produced. Or as my colleague Ernst van Zyl has said, present wrongs can never right the wrongs of the past, for the plain and simple reason that the present has a nasty and consistent habit of turning into the past. In that manner, a new generation of disadvantaged people is created. Why dig a new pothole to fill an old one? And number 5, the activists for BEE regularly rail against the very notion of institutional racism. It would do them well to look up the definition of institutional racism. Here is the definition. Institutional racism, also known as systemic racism, is a form of racism that is embedded through laws within society or an organization. It can lead to such issues as discrimination in criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare, political power, and education, among other issues. If we want to fight institutional racism in South Africa, the best place to start is to scrap the government laws that categorize people according to the color of their skin and consequently treat them accordingly. BEE is morally bankrupt and to the disadvantage of everyone in this country, except for the wallets of the politically connected and the feelings of the ideologically intoxicated. My name is Ernst Roots, and this is your fact sheet.